Hi, everybody.
Susan?
Hi, why is this thing on? Our program begins at noon. It is noon.
It's not on.
I will take it off.
Okay, thank you. Hello. Julie, unmute yourself.
I should be on. I've been on for 10 minutes.
Miriam's on, but Julie, unmute. Hi, Julie.
Do you see me?
No.
This time I'm showing my punum.
Well, it's push video. You have to click on video.
I do?
Yeah. See down below, there's mute and then there's video.
Start video? Okay.
Hi,
Oh, good. I'm in the dark. I love it.
Miriam. You have bright windows behind you. That's why.
I do.
Yeah.
Could that be the reason?
Yeah, that's why yeah, you have too much sun on you.
Oh, no sun. The room is not that
Or
bright.
brightness. I'm not fully dressed. No video for me today. Okay,
Your
well,
head is dressed.
Julie, unmute yourself so at least we can hear you.
It's okay, Rabbi, if you're wearing pajamas.
I'm not wearing, yeah, we don't care.
Susan?
Hi, why is this thing? The program begins at noon. It is 12:02.
Not on.
I will take it off.
Okay, thank you. How do I make this bigger? You guys are so, all right. That's good. We're getting a few people. Admit Sukasa. People, unmute yourself. Even if you're not going to show yourself, at least we could hear you.
Hi. Good morning. I mean, afternoon.
Yeah. Are you all getting ready for tonight? Yeah. What are you doing, Talia?
So Sadie's dad, he's living in the guest house through quarantine so that we could both co-parent. And he is wanting to make some Thai Passover dish.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds fun. There's a lot of Seders online, you know, from the temple. Did you go and you saw that, right? That you can get, if you go, you've gotten the emails, right?
From the temple?
Yeah, like WBT Passover at home. There are like links
Yeah.
to like 3 different Seders, 4 different Seders you can go to. Hi, Valerie. Unmute yourself. Hello.
Hi,
Hi, Roy. Unmute yourself. Okay. Hello.
Hi there.
Hi there.
Sukasa,
Yes,
we can't see you.
I know, because my computer doesn't have video. So, and I don't think you want to see me. I'm eating lunch. I'll put my phone on in a minute.
It's okay if you're eating lunch. It's fine. Somebody's chatting. What are they saying?
We're having 20 people at our virtual Seder.
I'm having about that many too. I don't know how it's going to work with all these people on Zoom. But
Crazy.
it'll be interesting. Okay, close this. All right.
Talia, it's Miriam.
Hi, Miriam. How are you?
I'm fine, dear. Can you quickly give me your phone number, unless you don't want to give it?
No, I don't mind.
Okay, dear, good.
Okay.
You have a pen?
I need your phone number. Yes, I'm ready to write.
You know, she's giving it to all of us.
Yeah.
Is that okay with you, Talia?
Yeah.
You might
that's
want to
fine.
put it in chat because this is on YouTube. So I
Oh,
would.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Put it on chat. Write it down on the chat.
Miriam, can you receive the chat message?
Well, I'll see later. Okay.
Yeah, you don't want it on YouTube, Talia.
Okay.
All right. Well, I didn't expect many people this afternoon. I admire you for all coming. So nice to have you for this little time before our Seders tonight. I know that, well, let's start with a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu
Eloheinu melech
melech haolam asher
asher
kitshanu
kitshanu
mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok
La'asok
b'divrei
b'divrei
Torah.
Torah.
Okay. Susan Ehrlich, unmute yourself so we can at least hear you.
Oh, okay. But how do you know I was speaking?
No, I didn't know you were speaking, but there's a
I
little
was. Okay,
microphone.
but good. Thank
there's
you.
a little microphone icon with a slash through it. That means
Yeah, I forgot.
Karen Ludwig, unmute yourself. And I
Yes.
can't see you either, Karen. Just
And
so you
I'll
know.
try and get this off.
Yep. Hello. Hi, Karen.
Hi, I can't stay though. I have another Zoom meeting for my class at the new school.
That's all right. Well, happy Pesach.
Happy Pesach. Put the ox blood on your door.
Yeah, it's not, it's. I
You
think
can
it's
get
sheep's
some at
blood.
Trader Joe's, I think, ox blood.
You can get it? Okay, good to know. So I know that Rabbi Leader did a whole teaching, I don't know how many of you saw it, on Friday about the laws of Pesach. So I wasn't going to do that because, you know, he already taught that, but I thought it would be interesting to share a lot of midrashim and stories that you might want, explanations that you may not have heard that I did some research on that you might want to use at your Seders or just find interesting. So I'm going to share all these different ones. I'm kind of going to go through the Haggadah and I'm going to tell the story and I'm going to tell you all these interesting midrashim. And then if you know any, you could share, or if you have any questions. So the first one that I found, maybe some of you know it, is that the Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, who was a very famous Hasidic leader, talked about the word Pesach, meaning really Pesach, which means the mouth talks. And he says this is another, you know, Pesach literally means Passover, but also here's a new interpretation. It means the mouth opens and we're supposed to tell the story. We're supposed to share the story of the miracles and wonders of what happened during that time of the Exodus. And he says the word Pharaoh in Hebrew can also, if you know Hebrew, it spells paro, but it also can spell para, which means bad mouth. So bad mouth, meaning that he denied God, he denied, you know, freedom, he denied life to, who is this, Harold? He denied life. So he's para, Pharaoh, and Pesach is the mouth speaks of good things, and Pharaoh had a bad mouth. So I thought that was an interesting little beginning to the thing. Then we know the story of the burning bush. And I wonder if anybody has any ideas. Why did God appear in a burning bush of all places? A burning bush. Why? Any theories of why that would be?
You're not supposed to see his face. That's one reason.
Yeah, but it could have been in a tree, in a waterfall, in a rainbow, in a cloud. Why a burning bush? Do you have any theory or ideas? Yes, Talia.
Is it possible because it can take away life? I mean, because it's powerful? I don't know. I don't know. I shouldn't have raised my hand, sorry.
Okay.
Well,
What do you mean it's powerful?
I mean that it's something like water. If our house floods, we don't have as big of a panic. We can maybe float to the top. If it's on fire, it's a little bit more powerful over us. It's harder to ignore or manage or contain.
You're talking about the flame part, the burning, the actual action of burning being.
Yes.
That's interesting. I was focusing more on why the bush,
Oh.
you know, itself, but I like that idea. I never thought of that. It's very good.
Well, the bush is very humble, isn't it? And it has its roots in the ground, it's grounded, and then it also reaches heaven and the air.
I like that. Yeah, that's a good one. Yes.
It made me just
When
think,
I was,
Wait, just a minute. Valerie and then Karen. Valerie.
Susan's words just made me think you don't expect God to be on the ground in a bush, you expect him to be up there in the heavens.
So to show that God is everywhere, even in the most humble
Yeah.
bush, it can be among the humble, and also as opposed to in the lofty heights. I like that, Karen.
No, I was on a hike once and I said, look, there's the burning bush, because the sun was hitting this red bush in the autumn and it looked like it was on fire.
That's beautiful.
And I thought,
So yes, it's symbolic. Well, this commentary that I found from the Talmud also says that this bush was a thorn bush, a brambly bush where even a bird or anything would be trapped in it. You couldn't get out. And it symbolized the horrible slavery that the Israelites were trapped in, that there was no way, it was so oppressive. It was like being trapped in this prickly, thorny, horrible bush. So I thought that was interesting. But then Rabbi Harold, hold on. Oh no. Who wrote When Good Things Happen to Bad? Kushner. Wrote something interesting, that the commentary is that it was burning, but it was not consumed. And how long would you have to watch it in order to realize it wasn't being consumed? I mean, a fire takes time, you're watching it's burning and burning. And so he suggests that Moses would have had to watch this amazing sight for several minutes, and that it was kind of a test of Moses to see if he could pay attention, that he could, focus and remain there. And Rabbi Kushner says this is symbolic of today. We have to pay attention to what's going around us in order to see the miracles. In other words, the miracle only became evident after he watched it for a while and realized that it hadn't consumed. And suddenly he saw it. So we have to sometimes really focus and look at things to see the miracle. So I like that as a contemporary explanation. Okay, so the Hasidic master, Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh Leib of Ger, the Gera Rebbe, he's one of the great rabbis of Poland, said that his grandfather said that, why do we eat bitter herbs? Why do we eat bitter herbs? Okay, tell me why. Why do we eat bitter herbs?
To remind us of the suffering.
To remind us of the suffering. But he said that you need, the tasting of the bitter herbs is the first step to freedom, because, and I had read this in another interpretation, the Israelites were so used to slavery, they didn't even know how bad it was. And so when we realize something is bitter and bad is our first step to saying, I have to make a change. If we get in our own lives, we can get used to abuse, to get used to a terrible situation, to addiction, to all kinds of negative feelings and emotions, either we put on ourselves or that are foisted upon us. We don't even realize how bad it is. Then we're not going to change it. So the eating of the bitterness is the first step to saying this is wrong. Also, on that note, I had read an interesting thing about why did God have to keep hardening Pharaoh's heart? In other words, it seems like it says in the text, first he said, okay, you can go. And then he hardened Pharaoh's heart, and Pharaoh kept changing his mind. And it was a similar interpretation that the Israelites were so used to the terrible conditions that it had to get really bad before they were ready to really leave. And that again is a lesson about becoming accustomed to abuse or negative experiences and not even realizing. And I think about, I find it very interesting that we've had homeless living in horrible conditions in this city for how long? And finally the coronavirus has forced our state to house them. It had to get so bad that it affected us. We don't want to catch it. We don't want an epidemic. So now we're finally buying hotels, renting rooms, paying them, giving them medical attention because it's gotten so bad, unfortunately. Yes.
I have another comment. I was thinking about this pandemic. We knew it was coming, But nobody did anything about it till people started dying in America. And the same thing with global warming. We've known about it for a long time. Nobody's doing anything about it until, until we're underwater, then we're gonna
Exactly.
start acting.
I agree with you. And I think about England, the prime minister, who's the one who said, oh, it's not that big a deal. We'll all get it. We'll get over it. Now he's in intensive care. Suddenly everybody's taking it, or he especially is taking his government more seriously. And that's unfortunate that we don't have the compassion or the vision. That's what a prophet is, in my opinion, that is always ignored. A prophet is not someone who, it's a person who sees what's coming and warns us, and yet most of the time prophets are ignored.
Like Cassandra.
Like Cassandra, but I think about Al Gore being a prophet.
Mm-hmm.
He prophesied how long ago, 20 years ago, that this was going to happen? And everybody just poo-pooed him or said, okay, right, or whatever. And it's unfortunate that prophets are ignored. Exactly. Okay. So another Passover teaching is from
Suze?
Rabbi, yes?
I think your point about the homeless was really, really important and well taken. The idea that when there was a risk of the other, which is us, being infected, then suddenly it became very important to find these people housing. Isn't that sad?
It's sad. Like we never had the money, but we do have the money.
Yeah.
And they're feeding them too and doing all kinds of things. So yes, a lot of things are very, resonant to today. So another thing that I liked was the symbol of the matzah, or getting rid of the chametz. We know it's like the bread of freedom that they rushed because they couldn't wait to be free. And also that was the bread of the poor. And I have read that this is not the first time people ate matzah. The poor, the Israelites, the slaves, that was their bread. They didn't have beautiful loaves of bread. And that, hold on, just somebody else wants to join. This was a teaching to all of us that the matzah reminds us not to be puffed up. During this time, we all are the same. We're all eating the same unpuffed up food. And so it's a way of teaching us that people who manipulate others and want to control, and they have ego and whatever, the matzah symbolizes the humility by a non-puffed up food, that if we look at it and think of it that way, and we're all not puffed up during Passover because we're all eating the same thing. So that was one thing I wanted to talk about. Now I want to go through the Seder a little bit, and we're going to talk about what's on the Seder plate. And we know the basic, oops, I don't know what happened. We know the base, who's this? Sue has entered the waiting admit. I don't know him. We know what's on the Seder plate, but there have been some suggestions to add some new things this year that I never heard of. One of them being a pineapple. And this is why. A pineapple whose exterior is hard, rough, and protective of its sweet and delicious inside reminds me, this was a person writing this, of the physical appearance of our first responders in their surgical gowns, plastic face shields, and life-saving masks. The care, compassion, and sweetness in their hearts to save lives is hidden behind their protective armor. So this was like a symbol of all of our doctors, all of our caregivers and first responders. They suggested that. And they also talked about putting a banana on the Seder plate. As we go through the days of staying home, we go through distinct stages of how we handle isolation and make efforts to stay connected. Like bananas that soften as they ripen, we too as a community have softened and opened our hearts to new possibilities and opportunities to connect with one another. So people who have had this hard exterior, we are reaching out. We are, I just read in England that they asked for volunteers, like 100,000 volunteers to bring food to elderly people, and they got 350,000 volunteers. People all over England, particularly London, have young people have volunteered to pick up prescriptions and drop off things and whatever, food, shopping. So it's changing. We're getting softer. So that was the thing. But we can't get rotten like a banana by we have to keep our social distance. This is this idea. So that was this idea of new things on the Seder plate. Also, I never grew up with this, but you know, on the Seder plate now, there is the lettuce, the romaine, as well as the horseradish. It's called chazeret. We have, you know, the charoset. We know about that. The chopped apples and nuts to be the brick and mortar. We know the shank bone for the paschal lamb. We know the parsley being for spring. And also, by the way, if you don't have parsley, you can use a potato or you can use celery. That's also acceptable if you don't have parsley. We know about the bitter herbs and the egg being also, I have a theory about the egg though. I know they say it's like for one of the sacrifices, but if you think about this time of year, it's also around Easter. And Easter also has an egg, which has nothing to do with the resurrection. But there's this Easter egg idea and the Easter bunny and this egg also in the Passover. And I feel, or it's my sense, that this egg is from pre-Judaism, pre-Christianity, that it's the fertility egg of the ancient, you know, goddess worship. That this egg was the time of spring, the time of rebirth, that the eggs, I mean, it's been transformed to have other meanings, but the Easter bunny and the eggs and the whole thing is nothing to do with the Christian story of resurrection. Talia.
Oh, also, all of the bunnies and like it's spring and that's when all the bunnies are mating.
Yes.
And yeah, so like all the eggs and the bunnies are.
It's all about fertility. So it's about fertility, but and rebirth, and that I guess is the connection to Jesus because he's like reborn. And for us, it's spring that we're reborn. And as the Jewish people, we are reborn from slaves to a nation, a holy nation. So there is this idea of rebirth in nature and in history. So I thought that was very interesting. Okay, so that also, I read something else that was very interesting about wine. Why is wine? Why do we start the Seder and why do we think wine is holiness and drinking of wine is holiness and make something sacred? I mean, I didn't know this. I just read this today, so I don't expect you to know. But any guesses about wine? Valerie? Your mute is on.
I can only think about Dionysus, and the Dionysians drank wine to get into a religious altered state. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, I like that. Any other ideas about why wine?
I don't know why, but I'm just thinking of the associations. I'm free associating. It's wine is the color of blood and life. And isn't there a song that has that? About there used to be some song about wine, and it also is a product of the earth and of cultivation, I guess. So it's both. It's both. You get wine both from God and from working. I mean, like bread, like lechem that we say.
That is that is very smart. And I read something that's connected to that, which is that in order to make wine, you have to live somewhere, you have to plant, you have to tend, you have to harvest, and you have to make the wine. So it means that you're living in a safe place. You're living in your home, you're living on your land, you're living in a place where there's your family and continuity, and that is considered sacred. So in order to make wine, we have to be in a place of safety, family, and connection to the land and to the community. And I thought that was a very interesting.
And the 12 spies, they found wine in Canaan when they went, and they brought it back. We have pictures of them carrying it on a pole.
That's
Two people carrying a pole with a lot of wine cluster grapes.
That's right.
And also, I think it was Lot or Noah, I don't know the answer to your question, Susan. I'm just guessing. But Lot on Noah, I think they planted
Noah.
Noah, as soon as he left the ark, he planted vineyards.
He planted vineyards, and he was actually, the commentaries criticize him for that because they say, oh, you don't plant food, you plant so you can get drunk. That his first thing was pleasure and not, feeding himself or his family. But that is exactly, and he got drunk.
That's interesting.
He did get
So yes, so that was another thing that I had read. Okay, so now we go to like the halachma, where we invite people to come in and eat. Everybody who's hungry, let them come in and eat. And it says in the Talmud that it is the obligation of every person to eat on the first night of Passover. So we invite anyone who doesn't have means. So they say, you're supposed to invite people, and we know that's a tradition. But there's another suggestion that, well, we can't do that now, right? We can't. Hi, Linda. Take off your mute. Take off your mute. Click your mute. I can't hear you. You have to click that little microphone on the bottom there. Anyway.
Oh, yeah, I had first time I'm doing the phone.
Okay, nice to have you. That one suggestion is that we feed poor in advance, because they say that everybody has to be able to drink 4 cups of wine on the Seder and eat the matzah, so that we give money in advance to people so that they will be able to have a Seder. We can't always invite them into our houses, but we can contribute so people can have the Seder ahead of time, so they won't have to beg or be without. And then another approach that I read was that this was never, it also means we should feed ourselves. If we're hungry for spirituality, if we're hungry for meaning, or we're hungry for community, this is a time to connect, to reach out and feed ourselves for what we're missing on an emotional level, not necessarily on a food level or a, literal level, but that there's some feeding going on. And that means right now, for those of us who are isolated and alone, living by ourselves, in order not to get depressed, we need to reach out. And sometimes people are too proud to say they're lonely, to say that they're, having a struggle. And as much as it's our obligation to reach out to them, we also have to feed ourselves and not let ourselves get down into that negative place or that dangerous space mentally. So that's another thing that I read. Okay, where's my Haggadah? Because I found some more stuff that I thought was interesting. Hold on. Okay. Hold on. Oh, okay. So of course, you know that we're supposed to recline at the Seder. And that's the way that the Romans and their lavish banquets, they would recline. And if you ever saw any of those movies about Roman times, they are lying on couches. They're literally like this with, feed me a grape thing. But the rabbis in the Talmud say, who should recline? All men, and then a woman of importance. The rest, no. But of course, today we're all important, so we all recline. But the rabbis are saying, I guess that was their concession. A woman of importance could recline as well, whatever importance means. They don't tell us. So I talked about the meaning of wine, and hold on. So this is really interesting that I only read a couple years ago. There's a section in the Haggadah where it says that it is told Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon gathered together in the town of Bnei Brak. They were so engaged in their discussion of the Exodus from Egypt, it continued through the night until somebody said, Rabbis, it's time to say the Shema, meaning they discussed all night. But according to the tradition, this was a time when they were not talking about the Seder, they were planning the rebellion against the Romans. And everything had double entendre. When they were talking about Egyptians, they were talking about the Romans. And this was a plot that they were planning all night for the uprising, which there was a huge rebellion against the Romans in, before the temple was destroyed. So they say that that's what it was. They weren't having a Seder, they were having a planning session and using the Seder as a cover. Okay, so we talk about the 10 plagues. And of course, we have our 11th plague. And I read something yesterday that was interesting, that the first Passover was when the Israelites were told to quarantine themselves in their huts because the angel of death was going to pass over and they couldn't come out. So there was a death threat. So they had to stay inside, just like we have to stay. So we're kind of like experiencing their sheltering in place. And we go through the different plagues, and one of them, which was the 9th plague, was darkness. And they say that it was so dark that not only could people not see each other, but they felt a dark, deep depression. They were deeply depressed. It was an emotional darkness as well. And they say that was darkness a punishment? Because Israelites could not see, the Egyptians could not see the Israelites as human beings. They were blinded. They couldn't see them. And we have a problem with that ourselves all over the world, where we don't see others as human, as vulnerable, as fragile, as needy as ourselves. There's them and then there's us. And we judge them one way and we excuse ourselves. Talia, did you want to say something? You're muted. Go ahead.
Hi. So I think that now, of course, like what you pointed out with the people who don't have homes that are living on the street, it's even people that may have a house and you don't even know that they can't maybe buy food because their business is flatlined. So there's this one story I read, I think it was Alice Walker in it, or maybe it was Maya Angelou, but it was about the whole idea of standing in line for rice at the church and wearing your best clothes because it's at the church, but then the people wouldn't give them the rice because they said, you look like you have money, but really it was the clothes that the woman got being a housekeeper for another family. So they wanted to wear their best clothes to show up at the church out of respect, but they were judged because it looked like they had. So now it's kind of like that whole judgment we can't do, because there are people that may look like they have and really they have nothing.
You're absolutely
That's all.
right. No, you're right. You're right. I was just reading about like our doctors and nurses and whatever who are really struggling because they can't go home. They don't know what to do in terms of infecting their families. And I just read today that the New York Plaza Hotel is turned the whole hotel into free rooms for doctors and nurses.
Oh, that's great.
Free, totally free. They get to come to a beautiful room. I guess they can't feed them, and they have to get their temperature taken first, but it's like a sterile environment where they can come and sleep in a clean, nice room with, everything, and they're giving it to them for free. That's, I thought, an amazing gesture. And a lot of businesses that have been very money oriented are starting to step up and do things to give. We're starting to see each other and not just ourselves. So darkness is lifting. There's a lot of interesting blessings almost from this terrible pandemic that hopefully will not disappear after it abates, whenever that may be, sooner than later. Also, I don't know if you know this, but tonight is the anniversary of the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto. It was on Erev Pesach, 1943, that they decided to rebel and attack and, die with valor if they had to. And so to, fight for freedom on the holiday of freedom, basically. So we remember the Warsaw Ghetto, and I don't know if you know this, but their leader was 23 years old, Mordechai Anulevich, who did not survive. And most of the fighters were teenagers. Most of the fighters were teenagers because their parents had been taken away, their young ones had been taken away, and they were the ones left in the ghetto after the deportation to Treblinka. And I wrote this piece that I just posted actually on Facebook, that the first night, on that night, I'm going to read you this. The Seder for the Jews of the ghetto was no longer symbolic, it was real. Instead of salt water, they had the tears they'd shed as they watched their families and friends dragged off to the cattle cars, never to be seen again. Instead of maror, they had the bitterness of wondering why the world stood by and did nothing to help them. Instead of charoset, they'd watched the bricks being laid for a 10-foot-high wall topped with barbed wire, which was built around them, cutting them off from the rest of the world. Instead of karpas, they cherished the few trees and blades of grass in the ghetto, well aware that the spring of 1943 might be the last spring they would ever see. Instead of the shank bone, they themselves were the sacrifice, choosing to shed their own blood rather than submit to one more day of German brutality. And instead of the matzah, they created their own symbol of freedom, a white sheet with a black Jewish star painted on it, which they hung from a rooftop overlooking the main square in the ghetto, where every Jew and every German would see it. It was the first Jewish flag in 2,000 years.
Wow.
So we remember them tonight. We should mention them if we can. And finally, I have two stories to share with you. This is really cool. You know, I don't know if you know that, but when the Israelites left, they took Joseph's body with them. He said, take my bones back to the land, the promised land, my homeland, when you leave. This is in the Torah, that they took his bones. So here's a midrash about this. Before Joseph died, he made his brothers promise him that when the time would come for the departure of Israel from Egypt, his coffin would be taken with them to the land of Israel and buried there. The promise was handed down to the children of Israel from generation to generation until the time came for the children of Israel to leave Egypt. But where was Joseph's coffin? So this is the midrash. The Egyptian had placed it in the Nile and let it sink to the bottom. Why did they do it? For two reasons. First of all, they hoped that Joseph's coffin lying at the bottom of the Nile would bring them great fortune. In Egypt, there was almost no rain during the year, and it surely would be a desert like the Sahara if it were not for the Nile. Even in those days, the Egyptians knew how to make use of a blessing. So they had canals and everything. So they felt the Nile was their god, one of their gods, and so they put Joseph there to be in touch with their god. The other reason was that they knew as long as the coffin was there, the Israelites would not leave. So it was a way to keep the slaves there because they couldn't get his bones. So after the whole thing with all of the plagues and everything, on the day when it was time for the Israelites to leave, Moses went to the bank of the river and said, Joseph, Joseph, your brothers are about to be freed from exile and they want to keep their oath. Come up to the surface. And immediately the coffin came up to the surface and they carried it with them. So that's a midrash, that the coffin was buried and it appeared, which, we know probably didn't happen, but it's a nice story. Finally, I want to talk about Elijah the prophet. And I may have told you this story before, but I think it's worth telling again. So as you know, we opened the door for Elijah the prophet to come in and announce the coming of the Messiah or the Messianic age. But also there's a midrash that Elijah the prophet wanders around the world dressed as a beggar, and he gives blessings to people who treat him properly, or he appears magically and blesses people in need. So there's a story, a famous story about how a very wealthy man went to the Baal Shem Tov, who is the Hasidic, the founder of the Hasidic movement. And he was a mystic, the Baal Shem Tov. And the rich man said, I want to meet Elijah the prophet. And the Baal Shem Tov said, that's impossible. And he said, no, I have to. I'll do anything to meet Elijah the prophet. I want to meet Elijah the prophet. So finally, the Baal Shem Tov says, okay, take your carriage, fill it with every beautiful food and everything for a beautiful Shabbat, and go to this little house in the middle of the woods where I'll tell you to go. It's like a little house. So the man got very excited. He took beautiful dishes and silver and wine and challah and all kinds of sumptuous food and tablecloths and everything. And of course, you know, a siddur and a book to study. And he drove to this tiny little shack in the middle of the forest. And he knocked on the door, and this man in rags, very poor, with a skinny wife and 2 little raggedy children, answered the door and said, yes. And the rich man said, I've come to spend Shabbat with you. And the poor man said, well, you're welcome, but we don't have any food. And he says, don't worry, I have everything. So he comes in, he puts out the tablecloth, he puts out all the food, and they have this amazing feast. And then the rich man thinking, oh, this is Elijah the prophet, says, okay, now teach me some Torah, give me some wisdom. And the poor man says, I'm sorry, but I can't read. I don't really know any Torah. And he says, you don't know any Torah? And he realized this is not Elijah the prophet. This is just some beggar. But he was there for Shabbat, so he stayed and they ate the next day. And he ended up teaching them Torah because they didn't even know how to read, and leading the prayers and whatever. And then at the end, when was Havdalah and it was over, he was in disgust. And he said, okay, thank you, goodbye. He was polite, but inside he was really upset. And as he comes out, he puts everything back in his coach. His foot gets stuck in the mud. It's, you know, the last indignity. And as he's pulling his foot out, the wife says to her husband, who was that man? And he says, don't you know? That was Elijah the prophet. So we're all Eliyahu, we're all Elijah this year. We open our door, our hearts, whatever we can do to make a better life or a better Passover or a better time for each other, because we all have the potential to be the maker of miracles and to help and heal others. So on that, I wish you a happy Pesach.
Happy Pesach.
Happy Pesach.
Happy Pesach. Have a wonderful Seder. I'll see you next week. Actually, I'm doing services this Friday night.
Oh.
So with the cantor, and actually we have a bar mitzvah family. A young boy wants to do his bar mitzvah on Zoom. So he'll be leading the Via Hafta and the service, a little bit of the service. His family will be there. So, and by the way, there's a great article about Rabbi Joel Nickerson in the Jewish Journal on Facebook. He does these music videos with his family about Jewish topics. They're adorable. You should take a look at them.
Suze,
yes.
would you send me your 10 plagues? Would you email it to me? I'd like to read it at the Seder tonight.
You mean the Warsaw Ghetto thing?
The one you did, yes.
Yes. I'd be happy.
Thank you, dear.
You're welcome.
Could you send it to me as well?
Yes. Wait, hold on.
Thank you.
Do they know about the play you wrote?
Yeah, they know I wrote a play about the
Yeah,
Warsaw
yeah.
Ghetto.
But this I thought was beautiful, and I thought I'd like to share it.
Okay, I'm happy to send it to you.
Thank
And
you.
I would love it if you sent me one too.
Okay.
Marvin Alperin @gmail.com.
Yeah.
Do you need our email addresses or do you have them?
Who asked me that?
Linda.
Why don't we just email you and say, please send?
All right, everybody email me and I'll return it to you. So
Okay, what-
it's snanus@wbtla.org.
Can you repeat that?
S Susan Nanus @wbtla.org. Anybody who emails me, I'll send it to you.
And are you going to be on Zoom for the Friday night?
Yeah. And also the cantor and I recorded a Seder that's also online on the temple website. A whole Seder we recorded when I just explained everything. And if you want to use any part of it, like if you want to just have him do the Kiddush, he sings the Kiddush, you can stop and start it because it's pre-recorded.
And is that there on the WBT?
Yes. Yes.
So a
The
pre.
whole Seder. with
Great.
everything in it. So you can,
Would
you can
would
use,
that be under the same Nanus?
no, that's on the website. Miriam, I'll send you that. I'll send that thing to you.
Thank you.
Okay, but usually you'll see there's a live Seder for David Eschel, there's a kids Seder, and then there's this Seder that Cantor and I last week dressed up. I made a Seder plate, the whole thing.
Oh, that's great.
It's a Seder.
So we can do that.
You can get it and it's taped, pre-taped. So you can use any part of it you want. You know,
And so that would be, you have your Haggadah then, is that it? That you're
we have the Haggadah that's online also. There's a Haggadah online also on the website.
Are you talking about the Fields one and the?
No, it's family Haggadah, it says.
Actually, the Fields Haggadah, the Family Haggadah, and
Family Haggadah.
Early Childhood Haggadah
Are all on there.
Yes, I saw those, yes.
So the family Haggadah is the one I used, which is basically the basic parts, and then you can stop and start for discussion. It's the cantor, though, chanting all the blessings
Oh, that's great.
and going through the whole Haggadah. So
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
that
That's
is
really cool.
If you want to laugh, watch David Eschel in the morning when he does Torah study for the kids. It's you know, he is gifted, and I watch it just because he's so funny.
Oh, I bet he is. All right. All right.
Goodbye,
everybody.
Haksamea.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a wonderful